Israel will use nuclear weapons. I think it's very real.
That's a long history most Americans don't know.
It's an inconvenient narrative, clearly to destroy the Palestinian people as a people. That's a red line. Actions and intention. That is not something that is discussed. First of all, the world needs to be denuclearized.
Sounds simple, obvious, yet nobody does it.
That's the only option. The sun is already set on the British Empire. They've literally killed peace. If people knew that, they would feel sympathy for the Palestinians and not for the Israelis.
You're doing something right.
The cowboys are the good guys.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Quick reminder, hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of our deep dives. Today we've got someone very special, Dan Kovalik. He's a human rights lawyer, author, and international law expert, and he's been speaking out on US policy and the war in Gaza for decades. Dan, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, first thing, October 7th isn't the start of the conflict, right? You actually traced it all the way back to Nakba in 1948. That's a long history most Americans don't know. Why do you think that is?
Well, because it's an inconvenient narrative. I mean, the whole um, narrative that the U.S. and the West has built is that somehow, Israel, its founding, first of all, was somehow peaceful, that there was no one there when the Israelis moved in, and that somehow it was the Palestinians' fault for the conflict. That has been the narrative for decades. Of course, it's not true. In fact, the land had been settled for a long time, and Christians, Jews, Muslims lived very peacefully on this land. And then in 1947, the Israelis started to push the Palestinians off their land. By the time Israel was created in 1948, about 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly and violently removed from their land. Thousands were murdered. Many were, beaten, raped in the process. It was an ugly, ugly episode. But again, if people knew that, they would feel sympathy for the Palestinians and not for the Israelis, right? And so that was not a convenient narrative for people to know about.
Oh, so basically, people are missing the backstory, and someone definitely benefits from that silence.
Absolutely. Of course, that's always true. With any historical event, there are narratives built around it to justify, the current unjust situation, right? And so, yes, I mean, the Israelis have benefited from it, and the West has benefited from it. The West that supports Israel, because it really is a Western colonial project. And like most colonial projects, they're built on lies. The colonizers are made to look. They are the good guys in the narrative, and the people colonized are either completely written out of the history, or they are vilified, right, as somehow subhuman, which justifies the colonization. So in the case of the United States, for example, which was founded through the genocide of Native Americans, I mean, millions of them were killed. But again, that is not something that is discussed, because that would call into question the entire project of the United States, right? So again, it's the violence and the murder are minimized, undercounted greatly. And again, the Native Americans are portrayed as the villains in the story. And again, when I was growing up, there were all sorts of cowboy and Indian movies, right? And the cowboys are the good guys, and so that's how again states justify themselves.
All right. You've called what's happening in Gaza a genocide. That's a strong term. Can you break down the legal criteria for us, and why is the ICC moving so slowly?
Well, I'll start with this last question first. The ICC is moving slowly because the ICC itself is a product really of Western invention, and its job has been really to pave the way for wars against the people of the global South, in particular of Africa. In fact, some people have called it the African Criminal Court because almost everyone who has been successfully tried before the ICC have been African, right? It's not supposed to go the other way. It's not supposed to investigate people from the Western colonial powers. Now, why is it a genocide? I mean, so first of all, genocide has two components: actions and intention. Okay, the actions, and all of this is spelled out in pretty much a page of the Genocide Convention. It's not, you can quickly go read it. And what it says is one, you have to have certain acts that make up the genocide: killing of a particular group, in this case, the Palestinians, killing, forcible transfer of the population, prevention of births of the population. I don't have them all at my fingertip, but you can see that those three easily have been met. No one disputes that the Palestinians are being killed. They're being killed in huge numbers. They're being displaced in huge numbers, forcibly transferred. They births are being prevented in a very, very explicit way. For just one example is that a fertility clinic in Gaza was destroyed, and all these embryos that had been kept there, frozen there, they were destroyed. Okay, so these are very, and that was done intentionally. Okay, so you have the acts. That's easy. The harder part is the intention. You have to have a specific intent in these acts to destroy in whole or part a particular group, a religious, ethnic, national group. Again, I think it's very easy to show this in this case. So these things that I mentioned are being done clearly to destroy the Palestinian people as a people. And one need only listen to the words of the people doing it to know that. Leaders of Israel are saying that they want to destroy the Palestinian people, right? So, I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's pretty clear cut case. In many alleged genocides, the intent is not so clear, right? But here it's very clear. So it's not even a close case, honestly.
Right. Well, weapons, bombs, and the world kind of looking the other way. It feels like a Sun Tzu stratagem sometimes, you know.
Yes, no, that is one of the biggest tragedies here is that the world has allowed this to happen. And because it's allowed Gaza to happen, that has set a precedent. The way that the war is being conducted against Iran is very much like the wars being conducted in Gaza, where the U.S. and Israel are purposefully destroying hundreds of schools, historic sites, um, electrical grids, and other civilian infrastructure and people. It's being done on a scale and with an intention that's rarely done by the United States. I mean, I heard a commentator this morning saying, if you look at the Iraq War, for example, it was prosecuted in a very unjust way, but there wasn't this sort of targeting of all these civilian sites. I mean, that's not actually totally true. There were a lot of civilian targets intentionally hit, but on this kind of scale, where right off the bat they destroyed a girls' school, I mean, that would be considered a terrible thing, right? Before now, it's just accepted that that's what's done in war, right? And Gaza really laid the groundwork for that, I think.
Well, speaking of weapons, the U.S. is sending them Israel. Israel is using them. Where do you see red lines being crossed here?
Well, in many ways, I mean, first of all, they're sending these bombs that are like, that have the destructive power of a nuclear bomb, that are being used against Gaza. Why is that being done if it's not to destroy civilians in a huge scale, right? That's a red line. I mean, the whole thing is crossing the red line again of supporting of what's very clearly a genocide. Um, U.S. law prohibits the U.S. government from supporting a military that is conducting a genocide. Right? The U.S. is a party to the Genocide Convention. It prohibits that, to say the least, and yet the U.S. is doing this. So, I mean, the whole campaign is crossing a red line.
And still, international law just quietly sipping tea, huh? So, you've also raised alarms about Israel, yeah, nuclear capability. How real is that risk today?
I think it's very real. I think there's a good chance that before this war is over, the Israel will use nuclear weapons. They have about 300 to 400, even though they're undeclared, right? Um, and I think they have the willingness to use them. Absolutely. In fact, there was someone at the United Nations who just quit, saying he quit because a nuclear attack is being planned on Iran, and the UN is doing nothing to stop it. So, I mean, I shudder at the thought, but I think it's a very real possibility.
Speaking about Washington, daytime diplomacy, nighttime bombs, that's Washington for you right now. How do you interpret that policy?
Well, it's a villainous policy. I mean, they attacked Iran in the middle of negotiations. And by the way, according to Oman, who was mediating those discussions, they were very close to a deal. And instead of making a deal, the U.S. attacked Iran. And by the way, murdered the Ayatollah, who was the one guy preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. He was very opposed to that. And they've killed other leaders there that, were the ones that could have made peace with the U.S. and Israel, right? So they've literally killed peace. They have killed the prospect for peace. And that seems intentional, by the way. Um, so, I mean, it's just the U.S. can't be trusted. How can you trust a country that engages in negotiations could have had a deal to prevent the war and instead started the war, right? And that's why Iran won't back down. They can't trust anything the U.S. and the Israelis say. It's not as, it's not even worth the paper any promise is printed on. So the chances of this being settled peacefully are pretty remote, I think.
Switching gears, the big picture. You think the US is gradually moving focus from the Middle East to countering Russia and China? Where does Gaza fit into this?
Well, I don't think they're moving away from the Middle East. Clearly, they're very much focused on the Middle East with this war in Iran. And Gaza and Lebanon and Syria, um, these are all targets for greater colonialization, right? Israel has this idea of a greater Israel, right? In which they intend to take over huge swaths of the Middle East. And that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing as we speak. They've taken over a huge part of southern Lebanon. They've displaced, I think, something like 1 million Lebanese from that area. They pretty much took over Syria through their proxy, this HTS group that's now running Syria. Um, so that's how all this, fits together. And of course, Iran is right there on the doorstep of Russia. So if they're able to overthrow Iran, of course, that would be a great threat to Russia and to China as well. So all those all those things fit together, I think.
And Iran, they're not just supporting Hamas, right? They're playing a game. Maybe one that Washington wrote themselves. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think Iran. I don't think they're playing a game. I think they're very open about what they're doing. They support Palestinian liberation, pure and simple. So they support Hamas to help bring that about. They support Hezbollah also to help bring that about. Um, they're very open about what they're doing. Um, and honestly, I think it's quite laudable. I think they're the good guys here. That's my view.
Okay, one state solution. Two-state solution is dead, I guess. But could one state solution even work today?
Well, of course, and it's the only solution. Israel has prevented any possibility for a two-state option by destroying Gaza and carving up the West Bank. There's no state that the Palestinians could have. Um, Israel has to be dismantled as a single ethnic, single religious state. It must become a pluralistic state. One person, one vote, no matter who the person is, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity or nationality, which was done to South Africa, right? Right. That's the only solution. And by the way, in any other country in the world, the West would insist on that solution, right? Um, they claim not to support theocracies, and yet that's what they're doing in Israel. So that's the only option. It's the only option. And people who live in Israel who don't can't live with that should just leave. That's all. That's their option. They can go to Europe or whatever, or go to New York City, whatever they want to do. But they're free to stay in Israel, but or what is Palestine, but only if they can live in an equal society. That's it. That's the option.
Then critics call you pro-Palestinian, sometimes pro-Russian. How do you respond to that?
I am pro-Palestinian. I don't. I'm not. I don't mince words about that. I mean, am I pro-Russian? I mean, in a way. I mean, I love Russia. I mean, I'm an anti-imperialist. I support any country who's fighting U.S. imperialism. You know, I may have disagreements with those countries on different issues, but I support any country to the extent they fight U.S. imperialism. And I have a real deep sympathy for the Russian people because they've suffered a lot in World War II, most, egregiously. Um, and I also sympathize with Russia because it was the first socialist country, and I admire that. So again, I don't mind those claims of people.
Well,
You can
my
see the
intuition
bust of
says,
Lenin
yeah,
right behind
I
you there.
see it, yeah, on the background. Well, my intuition says that probably mean that all this means that you're doing something right.
I agree with that. I agree. They always try to vilify people that are critical of the system and of imperialism, and that that's par for the course. You got to live with that, and I don't mind that. That's fine. Like you said, I mean, well, there actually used to be. There was even a song called "You ain't been doing nothing if you never been called a red," right? And it's true. Unless you're being vilified, you're probably not doing enough to fight. So.
And speaking of Russia, Russia recently held the International Transport and Logistics Forum in St. Petersburg. Do you think this gives the world a push toward rational discussions on conflict resolution and control over key logistic routes like the Strait of Hormuz?
I think so. I think sure. I think it definitely adds to the discussion about opening up the world instead of closing it down, like the West has been doing with sanctioning countries like Russia, for example. I mean, I can't even fly to Russia from the United States. That's ridiculous. You used to be able to fly from New York City to Moscow, right? And you can't even do that anymore. I have to go through a third country and on a foreign airline. I can't. And Russia wants to open up the world, wants to, there was just before Russia was sanctioned in the way it was, there was a train that had been just finished that went all the way from Portugal to Singapore. It's the longest train route in the world. It went through Russia, of course, and China. Um, and now that's been split in half. You can't take a train, any train from Europe to Russia or through Russia, right? Which is ridiculous. Um, so that has to change, of course.
Oh, interesting. If we take that as a yes, and Russia is indeed trying to steer some rational discussions on logistics and conflict resolution, how do you see this affecting other historical powers? For example, what are the chances for the United Kingdom could chances that the United Kingdom could lose its influence as a maritime empire in the coming decades?
Oh, that will happen. I mean, the sun is already set on the British Empire, and it's going to set even further. Um, I think Europe in general is losing its status in the world and influence, as is the United States, and that's going to keep happening because they've chosen violence. That's what they've chosen, and the world is rejecting that.
Thank you, Dan. Last one. If you were suddenly at the negotiation table tomorrow, three concrete steps to peace, please lay them out for us.
Well, I think first of all, the world needs to be denuclearized. The world has to give up its nuclear weapons. I mean that is a big step. Every country has to be recognized as equal, which it is under the UN Charter, but it's not as a practicality. Every country has to be recognized as a sovereign equal member of the world, and their resources have to be respected, and those countries have to be able to use the resources as they want. Again, that is all codified in the UN Charter and other covenants that grow out of the UN Charter, but that is not being honored in practicality. That has to also be a basis that we live with in the world, which would greatly lead to world peace. Um, and the last colonial project in the world has to end, and that's Israel's colonial project over Palestine. That is leading to so many conflicts in the world. That has to end. Those are
Well,
the three pillars of peace.
sounds simple, obvious, yet nobody does it. That's the tragedy. Um, okay, Dan, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today
you.
and sharing your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's been eye-opening.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Everyone watching, if you found this discussion enlightening, hit like, subscribe, and share it with your friends who care about understanding global events. We'll also link Dan's books and work in the description. Definitely check them out. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and peace out.